Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking at something pretty intense, a story from Reddit, cheating stories.
Right. It's from a user, Mr. Blue 3519990. He laid out his whole experience deciding to leave his marriage because of, well, repeated cheating by his wife.
Yeah, it's quite the story. So our mission here is to kind of unpack his journey, figure out why he stayed so long, what finally pushed him to leave, and also look at the advice he got from Reddit.
And it's interesting because it's his direct account, right? Shared online. It gives you this raw, unfiltered perspective on a really tough situation.
Exactly. And I think a lot of people can connect with this, maybe not the exact details, but the feeling of being in a difficult relationship, wondering whether to stay or go, maybe looking for answers online.
Absolutely. These are, tough dynamics many people face.
So let's dive in. How did this all start for them, the relationship itself?
Well, he talks about reconnecting with someone from high school years later. He was in the military. They found each other again on Facebook.
Okay, so a reconnection.
Yeah, and things moved incredibly fast. He visited her. She got pregnant within like 4 months, and boom, they were married.
Wow, that's quick.
Very quick. He actually calls those early years fantastic. A real whirlwind romance, it sounds like.
But it seems like trouble started fairly early on, and the first hint came from a friend.
Yeah, that's right. While he was away doing military stuff, a field op, he called it, a close buddy in his unit told him his wife had cheated.
Oof.
And it was with another friend in their unit. Apparently this happened when they were hanging out at another couple's place, friends they shared, so kind of layers of betrayal there.
Wow, yeah. From his wife and potentially people he considered friends. How did she react when he confronted her?
She denied it,
Yeah.
flat out. And he was young, just 20. He said he was immature and just really wanted to believe her.
So he did.
He did. He actually ended his friendship with the guy who told him, which really shows you how denial can work, right? When you desperately want things to be okay.
Yeah, that's powerful. But unfortunately, that wasn't the end of it. Fast forward about 5 years, 2015 or so.
Right. He mentions they started arguing more around that 5-year mark, said it's often a tough time for marriages. And then came the second time he found out. His wife was out drinking with a friend, came home, and he sort of playfully picked up her phone and found texts, really incriminating texts, spelling out what happened the night before, another instance of cheating, this time involving her friend, the friend's boyfriend, and his friend.
Good grief. It's almost like a pattern repeating itself.
It really seems that way.
And they had kids by this point, right? So what kept him there after finding proof a second time?
His main reason, he says, was for the sake of the kids. They talked it over, decided to try and make it work, try to reconcile.
That's such a common thing you hear, stay for the kids. But it makes you wonder, what's the actual impact on the kids living in that kind of environment? Is it truly better?
It's a huge question because it doesn't sound like things really got better. Something had to give eventually.
Right. So what was the final straw? What led to the decision to actually leave?
He points to 2022 when his wife started working a graveyard shift. He said her behavior changed dramatically and fast.
How so?
She became really cold, started insulting him frequently. He said their intimacy just vanished, completely gone.
That sounds awful.
Yeah.
Lonely.
Yeah. And on top of that, he found out she was using Snapchat to talk to some guy. She claimed the guy didn't like women, but,
Right. That would definitely raise some alarm bells given the history.
Exactly. So with all that, the coldness, the insults, the suspicious Snapchatting, he finally decided, okay, that's it. He was 35 by then. The kids were older. He filed for divorce.
And how did he feel immediately after making that call?
He described it as feeling like a huge weight lifted off his shoulders.
Wow. You can almost feel that relief.
Absolutely. It says a lot about the pressure he must have been under for years. That feeling is something you hear a lot when people finally leave really unhappy situations.
So he shared all this on Reddit. What happened then? How did the community react?
Oh, the reaction was overwhelmingly positive. Lots and lots of people congratulating him, saying he made the right choice.
Really? Support like that?
Yeah, tons of comments praising him for putting his own well-being and the kids' well-being first. It shows how these online spaces can sometimes offer that validation people need, especially if they feel alone.
That makes sense. Though you always have to be a bit careful with online advice, right? It's raw, but maybe not always fully informed.
True. It's a mix. And one big topic that came up was custody. He mentioned wanting majority custody.
Right, because he felt he was the more involved parent and that she wasn't really focused on family anymore.
Exactly. And that led to someone in the comments bringing up DNA testing for the children.
Ooh, okay. That's a heavy topic. Why did they suggest that?
Well, the first reason I mentioned was sort of practical for medical history. Good for the kids to have that info down the line.
Okay, that makes sense.
But yeah, given the history of cheating, the conversation pretty quickly turned to the possibility that maybe paternity wasn't certain for all the kids.
Right. That's the elephant in the room, I guess.
Yeah.
How did Mr. Blue, the original poster, react to that suggestion?
He was hesitant. He said, 2 of the 4 kids look just like him. One looks like his mom. The other has some of his features. So he felt like, based on looks, he didn't need a test.
But the Reddit crowd pushed back on that.
Big time. Yeah, a lot of users really urged him to do it anyway. They said looks can be deceiving. People shared stories. Someone even mentioned one of those paternity TV shows.
Oh, yeah.
Where kids looked identical to the dad but weren't biologically his. The main point was, you just can't be sure based on looks alone. Certainty is key.
That's a fair point. You really can't always tell. Did they offer advice on how to even do that with kids involved?
Someone did, yeah. They suggested being upfront with teenagers, and for younger kids, just framing it as a simple cheek swab, nothing painful or scary. But then another user jumped in with a really strong warning. They shared stories about adult kids cutting ties with their dads after being asked for a test, even when the dad was the biological father. Their point was that asking for the test itself can make kids feel like their parents' love isn't unconditional. Like, it depends on biology. It could cause feelings of betrayal, identity issues, damage the relationship, no matter the result.
That's a really important angle.
Yeah.
It forces him to think about why he'd want the test.
Yeah.
What would he actually do with that information?
Exactly. If finding out a child wasn't biologically his wouldn't change how he loves or raises them, then is potentially hurting their bond worth finding out? That was the advice. Really think about the what if and the why.
It's like a complex ethical dilemma wrapped up in all that emotion. Did the thread also touch on why he stayed married for so long in the first place?
Yeah, he did talk about that. He mentioned being raised in a Christian home, taught to work through marriage problems, though he noted infidelity was kind of the exception, which he maybe realized later.
Okay.
And he also just really wanted his kids to have the stable 2-parent home he had growing up. His parents had a long, happy marriage, and that was his model. But he did say he regrets not leaving sooner.
That regret seems common in these situations.
It really does. And people on Reddit also gave him advice for the future, right? About new relationships.
For sure. Lots of warnings like, be more careful next time. Set really clear boundaries from the get-go.
Yeah, be vigilant.
And that idea of never stay just for the kids came up a lot too. The argument being that kids are better off in 2 separate happy homes than one miserable one.
Right, that constant tension, the unhappiness, it affects them. It's like that dripping tap analogy, just wears everyone down.
Such a common piece of advice.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably for good reason. Were there any comments that disagreed or were particularly harsh?
There was one user who was pretty blunt, basically saying staying so long showed weakness.
Ouch.
Yeah. But Mr. Blue's response was actually quite mature. He acknowledged maybe he was young and naive at the start, but he learned from it and would be more careful in the future. He seemed to take it constructively.
Good for him. Any other interesting perspectives? Maybe from older people?
There was one, yeah. Someone who said they were 64, been married 45 years to a serial cheater.
Wow, 45 years.
Yeah. And their point was basically that sometimes that behavior just doesn't change, no matter how much pain it causes. A pretty sobering thought.
Definitely puts things in perspective. So
Right.
What was Mr. Blue's final word in his post? Where did he leave things?
He mentioned his wife had suddenly become really affectionate towards him after he decided to leave, which is interesting timing.
Right.
But he said he was resolved, going ahead with the divorce. And someone else shared a really scary story about false accusations and legal fights in their own messy divorce, sort of a warning about potential future difficulties.
Man, it sounds like a real roller coaster.
Yeah.
Just a complex, messy human situation.
Yeah.
But he found some community support online, which is something.
Definitely. It highlights how complicated these things are.
So wrapping this up, what are the main takeaways for you, the listener, from this deep dive?
Well, I think you get a really potent firsthand look at what repeated infidelity does to a person, to a family. We saw that incredibly difficult choice, when do you leave? We saw the issues around co-parenting after betrayal And we saw the spectrum of advice you can find online, from supportive to practical to potentially damaging. It really drives home that online communities can be a resource, but you need critical thinking.
Absolutely. And maybe a final thought for you to consider. Think about those different viewpoints on staying versus leaving. How much weight do kids carry? Or your own history? Or the hope someone might change?
Yeah, and think about the role places like Reddit can play in tough times, the good and the bad. But ultimately, it comes down to that self-reflection, right? Making those huge life choices for yourself.
Couldn't agree more. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.